The gospel lesson for today is from St. Matthew's Gospel, the 21st chapter, beginning at the 23rd verse. When Jesus entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, "I will also ask you one question. If you tell me the answer, then I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin?" And they argued with one another. "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why then did you not believe him?' But if we say of human origin, we are afraid of the crowd, for all regard John as a prophet." And so they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And he said to them, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things." "What do you think?" he asked them. "A man had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, 'Son, go and work in the vineyard today.' And the son answered, 'I will not.' But later he changed his mind and went. And the father went to the second and said the same. And he answered, 'I go, sir.' But he did not go. Which of these 2 did the will of his father?" And they said, "The first." And Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are going into the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not receive him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes believed him, and even after you saw it, you did not change your minds and believe him." Here ends the gospel lesson. I want to read you a story from a book written by Brennan Manning, who's written a lot of wonderful devotional books. And the title of this book is The Relentless Tenderness of Jesus. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Jackie who lived in the ghetto of a large American city. She never saw her father. Whoever he was never married to her mother. Jackie lived with her mother, but never knew a mother's love. Her mother was harsh, cruel, brutal. It didn't take Jackie long to discover the truth about the long line of uncles who periodically stayed with her. Growing up in this kind of jungle, surrounded by bitterness and contempt, Jackie quickly built up a hard shell of self-defense. People were out to get what they could, and if you were in their way, they would trample you. As she advanced into her teens, she became an object of interest for men. But that was just the trouble. She was merely an object, a source of entertainment, a Kleenex girl they called her to be used and tossed away. Jackie felt that the only way she could survive was to get the world before the world got her. And so she turned off, cut off, closed in. And then one day in summer, she met quite by chance a young graduate student who was working in the ghetto as part of his field experience in social work. His background had been much different from hers. He had grown up with love, understanding, and trust. And consequently, he was a secure man who valued himself for not what he accomplished, but just because of who he was. Peter was a warm, loving person. When he first saw Jackie, he greeted her with a friendly smile, but she gave him one of those "if looks could kill" glances in return. This didn't put Peter off. He continued to say hello day after day. At first, Jackie only sneered, but little by little, his warmth and openness began to penetrate her shell. One day, she gambled on a nod. A day or so later, mumbled hi. Still, she thought he was just like the rest of the men she knew, even though his tactics might be a little subtler. But he was simply a nice guy whose heart had reached out with a gratuitous offering of sympathy and compassion. She couldn't believe he was honestly interested in her just for herself, but she began to hope it might be true. A strange transformation began to take place. Her vulgar language was the first thing to change, followed by a new concern for personal appearance. It wasn't just the externals like combed hair, washed face, clean clothes. A new inner light started to show itself. As a person, she was beginning to bloom, and his love seemed to be responsible for it all. He wasn't just playing social worker. He was deeply interested. He cared. He gave himself. In her response to his gift of friendship, she was called to an attitude of trust that became very painful. For she eventually found herself forced to turn away from all her old convictions and suspicions. In a real sense, she died to her old self. The mask, the phony facade, the front she hid behind, all were shredded. At the end of that summer, he told her of his love and forced the issue. And she was brought to a brink. If she acknowledged her love for him, she would open herself to the risk of rejection. And there had been plenty of that already. But after a torturous struggle, she made the leap and surrendered her heart and trust. It seemed she had abandoned everything, yet she felt richer for it. She had become a new person. Jesus talked a lot about people becoming new, being transformed, like Jackie, a new person. And for you and I, that's a difficult concept. I don't know that you and I think about ourselves being transformed very often in our lives, our attitudes, our way of doing things, our outlook at the world. Sometimes someone who has lived through a very threatening illness and come out on the other side okay is transformed because they realize that time has a whole new meaning, and some of the ordinary events are actually the extraordinary events. And they look into the eyes of someone they love who they may have lost, may have been away from forever, and they look at that person with a new sense of love and care. There are those times in our lives when we hope to find an inner light, and maybe some of us could make a testimony about those times when something new came and it was an inner light. It shone light in a place where once had been very dark. And there are times when we are asked to turn away from our old convictions and suspicions, and those convictions and suspicions run very deep in every one of us in this room, I believe. And we're asked to turn towards love and truth wherever that truth may take us. That's a tough journey. In the gospel lesson today, Jesus is really speaking about old convictions and suspicions, and the temple authorities in that day were full of them. And they asked him, by what authority do you do these things? Do you speak and heal and teach? By what authority? They were looking for something that would authenticate him in a way that they understood authentication. The way that they understood the possibility of this man being a man of God. Authority, after all, is like a badge, you know. It's funny if I'm rambling around the church here and I've just come from a softball game and I'm looking like I slipped under the door rather than got ready to meet anybody, and somebody new comes into the church and they say to me, I'm looking for the pastor. And, you know, the underlining thing of that is, it couldn't possibly be you. And then I say, oh, I'm the pastor. I have to tell you, there have been times, not always, but there have been times when the look on their face, I wish I had a Polaroid. Click, and I hang that one up. Those poor Chaffin people, look what they have to deal with. Because authority is like a badge. It's an outward indicator. You look at someone and you think they have authority. We yield to people like that. You know, when an important person comes in the room, the expectations are very different. We look at those people and think, this is a person with authority. And they'll almost always have a very good appearance, or an appearance that somehow is markedly different than the rest of the people in the room. Those of the old ways and convictions, those of the conventional, to those people, Jesus did not make a good appearance, obviously. They didn't look at him and make acceptance of him. They questioned him instead. He must have looked out of place in the finery of the temple with all the leaders there. By what authority do you teach? Now, appearances are important in certain situations. We've taught that to our children. We were taught by our parents in many cases. For instance, when you go on a job interview, appearances are important.